Hi, I'm Kaylee, and within the last 24 hours, I have DNF'd not one, not two, but 3 different books. So I think it's time that we just talk about DNFing books in general. Today we're going to go through some points. I have 6 different points about how to DNF a book. I have many things to say on this subject. Before we dive in though, I'm going to reach back here to our Booktuber Shoutout book, and we're going to shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to Elle Marie Reads. I will leave a link to their channel in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up if you are happy to DNF some books. We are just DNFing books right and left. And of course, be sure to follow me over on Instagram and Goodreads and Storygraph and all the places. So in the last 24 hours, I picked up a book, read about 30 pages and went, wow, this is not for me. Set that aside, pick up another book. Only got through 14 pages of that one. Ooh, no, just can't stand this. No, not that. Picked up another book. Made it through about 50 pages of that one and just decided this one is also just really not for me. And I just gave up on reading for the day. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna watch a movie or something. So today we're gonna talk about why do we DNF books, or at least why do I DNF books? And maybe give you some pointers on why you should DNF books too. So first, I've been reading through this biography of Wilkie Collins, and you know how they say never meet your heroes because they have feet of clay? Yeah, I love Wilkie Collins's books, and now I'm just like, ugh, I did not need to know all the sordid details of your life. He was kind of a perv, so yeah. Made it to page 60 on this one and just decided, you know what? I don't need all these nasty details about this author, so that's a DNF. Then, as part of Booktuber, I picked up A Study in Charlotte. I've had high hopes for this one because it's Charlotte Holmes, who is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Sherlock Holmes, and, you know, fun mystery and stuff. I made it to page 14. And then the F-bombs started, and I was just like, no, thank you. And all these teenagers in this school are doing drugs and buying drugs and gambling and drinking, and I was just like, what is up with all the underage drinking and the drugs and stuff? Just, ew, I did not need all that. I just can't with all this, no. So then I picked up one of my wrapped books from a Wrapped Books challenge. Stephanie Barron is one of my favorite authors because I've read all of her Jane Austen mystery series. So I thought, here you go. This is an author that I already know that I like. This one is probably going to be 5 stars. I bet I'm just going to love it. And I got to page 50 and just decided, I just don't want all this. So it's Victorian, you know, London. Prince Albert has just died, and Queen Victoria, there's some kind of mystery going on, and she's in mourning. And there's this lawyer who's trying to get to the bottom of like the royal family's secrets. But there's just a lot of really gross things. There's this duke who has all these mistresses. And then there's like this prostitute who has a botched abortion and then has to have a surgery. And everybody's drunk all the time. Everybody is drunk all the time, okay? It was just very graphic with some really nasty stuff. And I just didn't want all that. I do feel like it's really discouraging to have 3 books in a row, all of which I had very high hopes for. And they were just all duds. Just so awful. So that brings us to our points about why do we DNF books, how do we DNF books, tip number 1, or rule number 1, or like whatever you want to call it. Know your boundaries. Know your limits about what you are comfortable with reading. I actually did a whole video about deal breakers in books. What is something in a book that will make me stop reading? All of these books that I DNF'd in the last 24 hours had major deal breakers for me. And I know my limits and I know my boundaries. I know that if something is too scary or too much violence, it's gonna give me nightmares and I just can't read that. Or if it's something that's just like really gross and blood and guts and stuff, I don't want to read about that. Or if there's a lot of profanity and everybody's drunk all the time and it's underage kids doing drugs and stuff, I just, yuck. So I feel like that's really important, that you need to stay true to your own moral values and not try to read something or push through it just because that's a popular book or everybody else is reading it. You need to stay true to your own values. And those are going to be different for every person of what they can tolerate. For me, I'm very sensitive. I can't tolerate anything too scary. And I know that about myself, and I respect that about myself. So I don't push myself to read books that are upsetting me. Tip number 2 is to know your moods. I am very much a mood reader, so sometimes it's not necessarily that there's a deal breaker in that book. I'm just not in the mood for a mystery or whatever it is. So maybe it's not a full DNF, it's just you're going to postpone that book and read it later. Maybe it's just a DNF for now, and some other time, could be years down the road, could be a few months down the road, you might revisit that book. Respect your moods. If you're a mood reader, just respect your moods and just give it time, and your moods will change, and then you'll be in the mood for a mystery at some point again in the future. If you try to force yourself to read a book when you're just not enjoying it, you're just not vibing with that genre right now, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You're not going to enjoy that book. And that's kind of the whole point, is you need to enjoy your reading. Tip number 3 is to maybe set a reading limit. So for myself, I have a rule that usually, if I don't encounter something that's a humongous deal breaker, but I'm still not quite enjoying the book, or I feel like, maybe I should give it a second chance or something, then I will read at least to page 50. That's just kind of my own little thing. If I read to page 50, then I feel like I gave this book a chance. I gave you a chance to grab my attention or to grab my emotions with these characters. And if you can't do that by page 50, then this really just isn't the book for me. If I encounter a major deal breaker for me, though, something that really goes against my values or my comfort zone in some way, then I'll DNF it right away. I ain't waiting until page 50. But if it's just like I'm not quite in the mood for it, or I'm just not sure if I like this writing style, or I'm just kind of losing interest, then I'll give it a little more of a second chance and I'll try to read a little further and see if it improves. This particular personal rule has been invaluable to me, because there have been plenty of books that in the beginning, I didn't really like it, but I was like, well, let's just keep reading, let's see. And then that book ended up being one of my favorite books. Number 4 is, when you DNF a book, you don't have to review that book. You don't have to explain to anybody why you DNF'd it. You don't have to mark it off on your Goodreads. You don't have to review it or give it a star rating. That book can just disappear into the ether and never be heard of again. However, if you do write a review, it might be helpful for other people who are wondering whether or not they want to read that book. And just because you're giving it a negative review, and just because you haven't finished it, doesn't mean that your experience is not valuable to others. So typically when I DNF a book, but I still write a review, I will put DNF'd at whatever page, and I'll put whatever the deal breaker was. It was profanity, it was violence, it was too scary, just whatever that it was, why I DNF'd that book. And then I feel like that's really helpful to other people if they're also like, oh yeah, I don't want to read anything too scary. And then they'll know to stay away. But some people want a scary book. So they'll read my negative review and go, oh, good, this is a scary one. This is exactly what I wanted. And then they'll enjoy the book. So just because you're writing a negative review of what you didn't like doesn't mean that somebody else might really like that. So either way, it could help other people to make the decision whether or not they want to read that book. So number 5 is about whether or not a DNF counts as having read the book. Like in your Goodreads challenge, do you count that as a book that has been read towards your Goodreads? Now in Storygraph, you have the option to mark that book as a DNF and to mark how many pages you read, and then that will count towards your page goal, because in Storygraph, they do a page goal, but it won't count as a read book. there's like a separate list for your DNFs. In Goodreads, you can create a bookshelf and label it DNFs. You can either just have it as one of your categories, which is what I do, or you can label it as an exclusive bookshelf, which means that it can only go in one category: read, want to read, or DNF. So then it will not be included in your reading challenge for your Goodreads challenge. So it's kind of up to you if you want to count those pages or if you want to count it as a read book. Typically, if I read up to my 50-page rule, I count it as a read book. Like, I count it as if I had read the whole book. Because I feel like, well, gosh, I put in all that effort to read at least 50 pages of it. I think it should count for something. Leave a comment and let me know. What do you think? Does a DNF count as a read book towards your reading challenges, even though you didn't read all of it? Or would you think that is cheating? But you did put in some effort to read the book. So I feel like that should count for something. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? This is kind of a gray area, isn't it? Number 6 is, what do you do with that book after you have DNF'd it? Do you trash the book? Do you donate it to a library or a used bookstore or like a little free library place? What do you do with the rejects, with the outcasts? What should I do with these things? The trash. No, I'm not going to throw them in the trash. I'll probably just donate them to my local used bookstore, where they have an exchange program where you can get store credit for books that you bring in and donate. But something good will come of it, and I'll get to get some new books at the used bookstore. So leave a comment and let me know, what do you think about DNFing books? Do you find it easy to DNF books? Or do you feel kind of guilty, like, oh, I should have read everything or something, which is silly. Like, you should feel absolutely free to DNF any book, whether it's a huge deal breaker, whether you're just not vibing with it at that moment, or it just failed to capture your attention. Let me know, do you feel happy and free to DNF books, or do you feel like this guilt, like you should have finished everything? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.